Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of The Latest. I'm your host, Hayden Lohrentz. Last episode, we talked about the impacts of short form content and how it can be harmful to the attention span of children. Today, we will discuss the topic of violence in media and its impact on how children develop. Working closely with the National Library of Medicine, along with the local organizations such as Rawhide Youth Services, we'll dive into everything you need to know as a new parent. Later in the show, I'll be joined by the head of the Department of Psychology at Iowa State University, Logan Winge, to explore the psychological impacts parents can expect their kids to experience from too much exposure to violent media. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Wisco Industries, happily providing support for all people of Wisconsin since 1949, Shackelford Heating and Cooling, and by One Community Bank. Now that we've got our intro out of the way, we can begin. Growing up, violence was everywhere on my television screen. SpongeBob punching Patrick, Batman beating up kids for any minor inconvenience, and even in LEGO shows like LEGO Ninjago, where people are being kicked, punched, and even knocked out, and that's not to mention the children's movies that feature violence. Violence became natural in the only form of media I had at the time, which was television. I became so desensitized to it that seeing violent actions in person didn't surprise me. I was by no means a violent kid, but that didn't stop me from wanting to throw a jab at the kid who stole my apple at lunchtime. It's these thoughts about violence that violence in media reinforces. Children view violence every day, so they become less ashamed of exhibiting violent behavior. This tendency to view violent actions as okay is what we will be seeking to explain today. Now that we've heard enough about my childhood, I'd like to bring in our guest for today's show. He's the head of psychology at Iowa State University with a PhD from Stanford, known for research on violent media, aggression, and the general aggression model. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Logan Winge.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. It's honestly a pleasure to be here.
Of course, glad to have you. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's talk about a field you know all too well, violence in media today.
Yeah, I think it is a growing issue that many parents may have never considered, when their child are growing up. I've done countless research and experiments with children aged 3 to 10, and the results were not what you might have expected.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm planning on having children in the future, actually, and this topic sticks out to me as something all new parents should learn more so that their child can be set up to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. This topic is a topic that not many parents know the dangers of, honestly. And so that is why I hoped by coming on this podcast, I can help any current parents of young ones to understand the risks of their child viewing violence in media.
Yeah, and speaking of some of the work you did, I'd like to take a look at an article you wrote titled "The Influence of Media Violence on Youth." In this article, you mentioned that the certain characteristics of viewers, social environments, and media content can influence the degree to which media violence affects aggression, and that was in an article you wrote in 2003. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, when conducting this research, we conducted a survey and found an extensive presence of violence in modern media. Um, as well as many children and youth spend an inordinate amount of time consuming violent media. Um, this just alerted us to the fact that children are viewing an immense amount of violence, thus creating an environment of violence being, normalized.
Yeah, wow, I never knew that children were viewing so much violence. I mean, I know from my experience, but just seeing if others had that as well. I guess my next question would be, we know this is a problem. What can parents do to prevent the impacts?
You know, that's what every parent is wanting to know now. Reducing exposure to media violence will reduce aggression and violence. It's kind of clear that what sorts of interventions, oh, it's less clear what sort of interventions will produce a reduction in exposure. Our research suggests that parental meditation interventions are likely to yield beneficial effects.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. You don't want to completely control your child's life, but you want to make sure that whatever they are watching isn't doing harm to them. I think that finding that parental mediation would be very helpful for parents. I wanted to bring up an interesting statistic I came across while speaking with our friends over at Rawhide Youth Services based over in the Appleton area. They say that by their 18th birthday, an average person in the United States witnesses over 40,000 murders on TV, and that was conducted by the National Health Institute in 2017, or the National Library of Medicine in 2017. And this statistic just blew my mind. I really just wanted to know, what do you think about this?
Yes, honestly, that's very shocking. I had no idea. And, it aligns well with what we found in our research as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting, the correlation. And I was told that this also doesn't account for assault, aggression, or other violent actions in that same survey from 2017, that same experiment. And Rawhide Youth Services also stated in a recent article that 60% of all TV shows have violent scenes, as well as 73% of shows designed for children 7 and under having at least one violent act in them. Crazy stuff, right?
Yes, honestly, most definitely. I think the research Rawhide Youth Services found, gives us a good reason as to why my team's research found the results we did. It's clear that it is very challenging to avoid violence in today's media.
All right, I'd like to take a little commercial to thank our sponsors. Again, Wisco Industries, happily providing support for all people of Wisconsin since 1949. Shackelford Heating and Cooling, and by One Community Bank. Have you ever struggled with finding your community? Try the Eau Claire Area Community Coalition, actively building a competent community and culture for all of Eau Claire. I'd now like to take a look at an article from the National Library of Medicine. According to a study conducted by the National Library of Medicine, they found that children who watched violent animated movies frequently were more likely to experience violence and social isolation than those who watched nonviolent animations. And this was done by a researcher in 2023 named Poonam Saba. Yeah, what do you think about this?
Yeah, honestly, that's very similar to what we found in our research. We found that the weight of evidence indicates that violent actions seldom result from a single cause, rather, multiple factors converging over time to contribute to such a behavior.
That's a great point. Violence in media clearly has an impact on children and their development, but it isn't the only thing causing kids to exhibit violent symptoms. I think that parents should limit children's exposure to violent forms of television and film, but don't completely take it away. Give them things to do that don't include violence.
Yeah, that's true. Honestly, we see this across the board with violence and social media, become so integrated in media, it's almost impossible to avoid. So it's best to limit as much as possible and distract your children with other options.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And in an experiment conducted by the National Library of Medicine as well, students were not eliminated from viewing violent actions or prevented entirely, but their aggressive and behavior issues were reduced watching violent animations, and that was done by Poonam Saba in 2023. Thus proving that you don't need to completely take away all forms of media, but it is proven that violence in media causes aggression and can be prevented if handled correctly by parents.
Yeah, that is correct. And a study we conducted found that if a kid does show signs of violence from things they've seen, parents must be involved in a therapy session to have the best results. This tells us that the best way children can fix their behavior is through parental intervention.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of The Latest with Hayden Lohrentz. I've been your host, Hayden Lohrentz, joined again by my good friend and professor of psychology at Iowa State University, Logan Wingy. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join us next week when we talk about why every kid could benefit from watching the show Sesame Street. And thank you for watching, and until next time. The latest is made in part by Wisco Industries, Shackelford Heating and Cooling, the Eau Claire Community Coalition, and by One Community Bank. We thank you for your continued support, and until next time.